Dr. Johnny Smith.
That was a very warm welcome, thank you. This is my third class period, and I'm really enjoying being back. I can't believe I'm gonna say this out loud. I graduated from LHS 25 years ago. Like, when I stop to think about that, I can't even understand, where did all the time go? I haven't been back to Libertyville in 20 plus years either, but I'm thrilled to be back. This is the first time I've seen snow in 4 years because I live in Atlanta and it rarely snows there. So I was really excited when I saw the snow out on my rental car and the snow coming down. It was like brought out this childhood joy, you know, like, yes, a snow day. But then I was like, oh, gotta go to school, right? I'm sure that's what you thought this morning too. You saw the snow, you'd like to be outside playing or doing something fun. But I hope this is fun for you. I'll try to make it interesting and engaging. And I'm so thrilled to see you all today. So let me tell you a few things about myself. I am a historian. I am an author. I'm a storyteller. I'm a teacher. I teach courses at Georgia Tech about the history of modern America, about the history of American sports, and some other classes. And I love it. I love being a teacher. I love engaging with my students. But the thing I probably love the most is writing books. That's what really moves me, okay? I'm gonna tell you a little about my writing career and how I write and what I write and so on today. So, let's dive in. Slide. First thing, what do historians do? We study the past, we study change and continuity over time, and we do that with sources, primary sources. Those sources allow us to reconstruct the past. And so what I think of being a historian, sort of like, it's like being a detective. And I've got to find these puzzle pieces to a mystery, to put a story together, okay? And so when I'm working on a project, I have a series of questions. And to answer those questions, I've got to find the source material. But unlike a puzzle, where someone hands you a box with a picture on the cover, and you're like, okay, I got to put this together somehow, you've got to go get the puzzle pieces, and the picture is in your mind. You don't know exactly what it's going to look like, you know? How do you tell the story about a civil rights march? Well, maybe you would start by looking at the newspaper coverage. Maybe you would then go to a library and read some books. Maybe you read some diaries from people who were there, witnesses. Maybe you would watch television news footage in an archive that covered the march. There's all these different sources you would need to tell the story about the march. But history is interpretive, right? That is to say that if you and I wanted to write about the same subject, this civil rights march, let's call it the March on Washington in 1963, and we look at the exact same sources, we'd probably write the story differently because it's interpretive, right? History is a debate, and historians are always making arguments about certain events, questions, and debates. That's what we do. So I think about history as a process, an investigation. That's what history is to me. It's about an investigation into a question that you want to address. Okay? Next slide. For me, I've always been interested in sports. Since I was a kid here, growing up in Vernon Hills and Libertyville, sports were the center of my universe. When I was in study hall here at LHS, I would read the sports page instead of doing my homework. That's what I love to do. The Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times, that's what I was always interested in. So for me, sports has always been an important part of my experience. But more than that, I would argue that sports not only reflect the values of our society, but by studying the history of sports, we can better understand the history of America, American culture, the shared experiences of Americans, how the games connect us as Americans, as people who live in a community, whether it's Libertyville or Chicago or the state of Illinois, as Cubs fans, Bears fans, you name it. It tells us something about that community. Furthermore, sports reveal a great deal about our values, our culture, and our politics, our economics, capitalism, nationalism, globalization, gender, ethnicity, immigration. I could go on and on. Sports are my magnifying glass for studying the past, for studying social conflict. Sports have historically been a gathering site where Americans have confronted and debated social, cultural, and political conflicts. Take, for example, the story of Jackie Robinson. How many of you have heard of Jackie Robinson? Okay, almost all of you. Can someone tell me why he's an important historical figure? Yes.
First African American playing Major League Baseball.
Yes, so he essentially reintegrated professional baseball. There had been black players who played with white players in the late 19th century, but in the modern era of Major League Baseball that's marked by 1903, when the American League and the National League came together, yes, Robinson was the first. And it wasn't just a baseball story. This was a story that moved from the sports page to the front page, because it was a civil rights story. And by following the life story of Jackie Robinson, we could better understand race relations in the aftermath of World War II. We can better understand the beginnings of the modern civil rights movement and the role that sports played in this larger debate about racial equality in America. Those are the kind of stories I like to tell. Those are the kinds of stories that I teach in my classes at Georgia Tech and that I write about in my books. Next slide. I do this because I believe in the power of storytelling. I am a narrative historian, which means essentially that all my books follow a narrative, a chronicle of events that unfold over time. That means that there's a clear beginning, middle, and end. There's an arc to the story. There's a series of turning points that I want to write about. I want the reader to not just learn from the story, but to experience history. And I think that storytelling is powerful because it's in all of us. We're all storytellers. Every single one of us tells stories every day, right? You tell stories to your friends, to your teammates, to your family members, to your parents, right? When you come home from school, you tell your mom about your day, you do it in a story. Stories provide coherence, clarity. They help us better understand the world around us. They're great learning tools, but they also appeal to the emotions, right? To our feelings. We use stories to persuade people, to convince people, to connect with people, to build communities, to build connections with our friends across generations. Storytelling has the power to persuade, to entertain, and to inform. And I love telling stories. That's what I try to do in my classes, and that's what I try to do in my books. Next slide. Oh boy. Going back in time, 1999. Jay Smooth. That's what they called me. I know. I got that nickname, Jay Smooth, from my nemesis, Ryan Doyle. That's right. My freshman year, I tried out for the boys basketball team. And I didn't make it. That picture's from my senior year. I'll get to that in a moment. I didn't make the freshman team, but Ryan Doyle did. Oh, I couldn't stand Ryan Doyle. He was from Michigan. He cheered for the Red Wings and the Pistons. Oh, he was so annoying. Always talking. He's not better than me. I'm better than Ryan Doyle. I should have made the team. That's what my inner dialogue is saying, okay? So, anyhow, I was pretty crushed. And when I was at LHS, I had great friends, great teachers, but I didn't try out for the basketball team again my sophomore year or my junior year because I was afraid I wouldn't make it, that I wasn't good enough. That's what I started to tell myself. See, the reality is, when I was here, I was filled with self-doubt, lacking confidence. I didn't really think that I was particularly good at anything. It's kind of a hard thing to say out loud, but I'm a grown-up now, and I can look back and see that. And I was probably struggling with some depression on some level, anxiety in the classroom. And the truth is, even though I'm a professor today with a PhD and 3 degrees, and I've written 5 books, and I've won some fancy awards that are nice, I was a C student in high school. When I went to go see my guidance counselor talking about colleges, I gave her a list of schools I wanted to go to. And she said, Johnny, you can't get into these schools. You just don't have the grades or the test scores. And that was really crushing for me, to see myself that I couldn't do that I couldn't go to those schools, that I was just not capable. That's what I started to believe about myself, at least. But my senior year, there was something I really wanted, and I wanted to make the basketball team. So I made up my mind that it was unacceptable not to try. It wasn't acceptable to try out for the team. It wasn't acceptable not to try in the classroom. I wanted to be something, right? I didn't want to feel invisible or unimportant anymore. So at any rate, I tried out for the varsity basketball team my senior year, and I made the team. And I was really excited, really proud. Now, I was not a basketball star. I was, one of the last men at the end of the bench. But the LHS cheerleading squad had a Johnny Smith cheer, okay? None of the other players had their own cheer. That's all I needed at 18 years old, my own cheer. Those girls were great. Do I remember it? Something like John, Johnny Smith. It wasn't the best cheer, but, I didn't care. I'm looking over there. I don't know what's happening on the court. They're cheering my name. Are you kidding me? I felt like a god. Well, at any rate, so where was I? So I don't know who made the choice about the American flag shirt, by the way. I don't know whose idea that was. I don't know. But my wife thought it was a good picture to share with you all. So what happens? I graduated from high school, and I made plans to go to Illinois State. That's the summer of 1999. My mom and my stepfather, they got divorced. My mom moved to Arizona, and before I went off to Illinois State, I lived with my dad in Palatine. And that summer, I worked in a sheet metal shop where my dad worked. And my parents, they did not go to college, but they really wanted me to go to college. And when I'm in that sheet metal shop that summer, it's hard work. It's dangerous work. Your hands get cut from the metal, your arms get cut, you're on your feet all day. And I looked at the faces of the men doing this work day after day. And I think to myself, I don't want to be like this. I don't want to come back here. None of these guys went off to college. They didn't have any advanced education. They didn't have options. I want options. I don't want to come back and do this. So I made up my mind that when I went to college, I was going to do my best. I didn't know if that meant I would get good grades, but I was going to do my best, which I had not been doing. Okay? Slide. So in the summer of 99, when I'm working at the sheet metal shop, I'm getting ready to go off to ISU, and on July 2nd, 1999, I get this devastating news that a man that had been very good to me, Ricky Birdsong, the former men's basketball coach at Northwestern, he had been murdered in a hate crime. Oh, that's his son, Ricky Jr., he was 8. Coach Birdsong was just walking or jogging around the neighborhood with his 8-year-old son and his 10-year-old daughter when a white supremacist, a neo-Nazi, opened fire and just killed him just because he was black. This neo-Nazi, Benjamin Smith, had also opened fire on Asian people and Jewish people in Indiana and other parts of Illinois. He killed 2, injured 10 others. This was devastating for me. I knew Coach Birdsong personally. When I was younger, I was a ball boy in the Northwestern basketball program. I knew one of the assistant coaches very well. The assistant coach's son, he was one of my best friends. So I was around Coach Birdsong a lot. He was warm, he was generous, he was kind, he was a good leader. And whenever I was around him, he always asked me, how are you doing in school? I'm doing pretty good. I would lie. Because I was ashamed. But I didn't want to tell him the truth. That I'm not a good student. I didn't want him to know that because I looked up to him. He was the first black man who had a prominent role in my life. You see, growing up in Libertyville in the 90s, it's a pretty insular community. I didn't know a lot of black kids. I think there were 2 black kids on my basketball team. I knew them. But that was it. We didn't talk about race in my household. We didn't talk about racism in my household. We didn't talk about inequality. We certainly didn't talk about neo-Nazis. So I didn't know how to process any of this. I remember when I told one of the guys at the sheet metal shop that I was going to the funeral of Ricky Birdsong, this older white guy who I thought was a good man, he said to me, "Oh, you mean that Nigger who got himself shot?" I was stunned. It was like someone had punched me in the stomach. I didn't even know what to say. I went to the funeral, and I was just overcome with emotion, this devastating loss. And I just sobbed, and I felt so alone. And this older black woman sitting next to me in the church, she handed me some tissue. And I knew this was going to be a defining event for me. But I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have anyone to talk to about racism in America, the history of racism in America. but it weighed on me, and I took that weight with me to college. Slide. After 2 years at Illinois State, I realized I love learning. I love books. I love to read. Oh, okay. How much time do I have then?
22 and a half.
Oh, okay. 22 and a half, precise. Okay, so I go to Illinois State. Guess what? Straight A's. I'm not a loser. All those things I believed about myself, they weren't true. That was empowering to know that if I didn't put limits on myself, if I didn't allow other people to put limits on me, I could do good things. I could be a strong student. They even offered me a scholarship to stay at Illinois State, but now, I can go to those schools on my list. I'm gonna go to Michigan State. I'm gonna go to Michigan State in East Lansing for a number of reasons, but one of which is my best friend, Ryan Doyle, was there. Ryan Doyle and I would become great friends. I was the best man in his wedding, funniest guy I've ever known, and what turned out as a rivalry turned into a great friendship. At any rate, when I was at Michigan State, I was a history major, thinking about becoming a teacher and maybe a high school basketball coach. But in this man's class, Dr. Pero Dagbovy, I took a course, a seminar in African American history, and it was there that I began to grapple with the history of racism in America, began to grapple with the history of white supremacy and violence in America. Where does that come from? To try to process how that shaped the moment that I lived through in the death of Coach Birdsong. So in Professor Dagbovy's class, I learned so much, not just about history, not so much about race, but about myself. I had to write this research paper, 20 pages, he said. 20 pages? What are you, nuts? I didn't know how to write 20 pages, but I went to the library at MSU in the stacks. Okay, the stacks, rows and rows of old books and volumes of magazines and journals. And what I realized is I could spend hours in those aisles, thumbing through the pages and uncovering a whole world I didn't know existed. And I felt at home. I belonged there. I belonged in the library. I belonged in that space where I could use my imagination and my creativity and begin to think about what I was going to write. So I wrote this paper about Muhammad Ali for Professor Dagbovy. And do you know what he told me when I turned it in? He said, this is pretty good. You should go to graduate school and keep writing. Keep writing? This paper? Really? I, to this day, do not know what he saw in me. I don't know, but he saw something in me, some kind of ability. He says, go to graduate school. Keep in mind, my parents didn't go to college. It was a big deal just to get a bachelor's degree. But I thought, okay, now I began to think, I like teaching. I like the idea of writing. Maybe I'll become a college professor. You have to understand, I was a C student. This is unimaginable, but now I got dreams, okay? So I've got these dreams. I go to Western Michigan University. I get a master's degree in history. I enjoy it there. Then I decide, okay, I'm going to stay on this journey, get my PhD at Purdue University. Okay, I go to Purdue, and I study with Dr. Randy Roberts. He was my writing role model. Randy is one of those people in my life who, outside of my parents, had a profound influence on who I am. He's the best teacher I've ever seen. He's the most talented writer I've ever been around. He inspired me. I wanted to be like him. So I worked with Randy, and I graduated with my PhD in history, and I made plans to pursue a position as a professor, as a history professor. And I wrote my first book, which started as my dissertation at Purdue. Next slide. My first book, Sons of Westwood. John Wooden, UCLA, and the dynasty that changed college basketball. I was really excited to write this book. Motivated. When I was at Purdue, that's when I started working on it. I would get up every day, and I was just eager to get to my desk and to keep punching those keys. Why? It's a fascinating story. In the 1960s and the 1970s, John Wooden's teams, the Bruins, they won 10 national championships in 12 seasons. 10 national championships in 12 seasons. At one point, they won 7 in a row. This is the moment when college basketball, men's college basketball, became a big business, a commercial enterprise, and a national phenomenon. And UCLA was right at the center of it. I wanted to tell that story. But there was another part of the story I wanted to tell. And that is in the 60s and the 70s, the world of college athletics clashed with the politics of the times. The civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, the counterculture, the rise of the new left, etc. These athletes, they became part of all of that, and they became outspoken political activists. So I want to talk about how these players, famous players, became important political voices in the national culture, this collision in sports culture and political culture. So I wrote my first book. This is me at my first book signing at the Georgia Tech Barnes & Noble. God, I look younger there. I could see it. A little lighter as well, okay? Not gonna lie. But that was a fun day, right? I wrote a book. This is amazing. Couldn't believe it. Okay, next slide. How did I do it? There's a whole process that I followed. I'm gonna give you sort of a snapshot of that process, what it looks like. Well, it began with those questions, right? All books start, writing history, writing nonfiction, with basic questions, broad questions. How did John Wooden build the UCLA dynasty, right? How did he build this incredibly dominant program? That was one major question, or two major questions. Then the other questions, how did the political culture shape these athletes? What were the consequences of their activism? What about the backlash? There were a lot of people who didn't like that Bill Walton, who was the College Player of the Year, sat down in the middle of Wilshire Boulevard and protested the Vietnam War and got himself arrested. Whew. That's an important story, right? It tells us something about athletes doing something they had never done before, and that is pushing back on the powers that be in joining protests. So this is a powerful story. I want to tell it. So I read a bunch of secondary sources about UCLA, about college basketball, about John Wooden, biographies, histories, etc. Okay, then the real fun begins. That is, go find the puzzle pieces. Go find them in the archives, in the libraries, in the microfilm reels, with the old newspapers. Collect all that material. Read it. Mark up your notes. Create your files. Organize them. Then, once you have 80 to 90% of your research material, build a chronology, a timeline, so you can see how this narrative arc will take form. The beginning, the middle, the turning points, and the end. Sketch that arc of the story out. Now that was pretty easy with this book, because after John Wooden won his 10th title in 1975, he retired. So I knew that the second to last chapter would really end with that story, and then there would be sort of a chapter that comes after that to sort of reflect upon what had changed and these scandals that had existed after he left. Okay, anyhow. Then draft the first chapter, right? Think about, okay, what are the ingredients that are going to go into this story? You just start with the opening line. This is the thing I spent a lot of time thinking. I need an opening line that's provocative, that will make the reader want to keep going. That's my job, to make you want to keep reading. So in chapter 1 of The Sons of Westwood, I remember distinctly sitting in my home office trying to come up with a line, and this is what I came up with. John Wooden wanted to turn around, but it was too late. Indiana was long gone in his rearview mirror. John Wooden wanted to turn around, but it was too late. Indiana was long gone in his rearview mirror. You know, he wants to turn around. Where's he going? He's leaving Indiana? Why is it too late? The whole point is to get the reader to ask those questions so they'll keep reading and find the answers as they turn the page. That's the whole idea. And I wanted the reader, as I described this scene where Wooden packs up his family in a car in 1948, leaving Indiana, going to UCLA, he's filled with doubt. He doesn't think he's going to be that successful there. He didn't really want to go. But it was too late. He had signed a contract, and he had all these regrets. UCLA was terrible at basketball. But he took the job, and so there's all that inner turmoil, all that inner conflict. It tells you something about the character, about Wooden, right? Okay, then you're plugging along. I set daily writing goals. 500 words a day is like my bare minimum, okay? That may not mean anything to anyone here. That's okay. But for me, it means that, okay, in 5 work days, Monday through Friday, I got 2,500 words. Okay, 4 weeks in a month. At the end of the month, I've got a chapter. I can write a chapter in a month. That's my mindset, right? Knock out those words. Then I edit, then I revise, edit some more, revise some more, on to the next chapter. That is a snapshot of how I do it. There's a lot more to it, but... Okay, next slide. This is the book that has been the most commercially successful. I've received the most recognition for it, I'll put it that way. And it's a story about Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champion of the world, and his mentor, Malcolm X, who was a minister in the Nation of Islam. How many of you have heard of Muhammad Ali? Oh, very good. Okay, tell me something about Muhammad Ali that you know. Anything. Yeah.
He was a world champion.
World champion, yeah?
For boxing.
Yeah, for boxing. All right, good. What else do we know about him? In the black jacket.
He got arrested in his prime.
Yeah, very good. Do you know why?
Because he didn't go, so he didn't want to get drafted.
Yeah, so in 1967, he was convicted of violating the Selective Service Act for refusing to serve in the United States Army during the Vietnam War. Now that story is not really covered in my book here, but it's vital to understanding the importance of Muhammad Ali in the 60s. See, he was a polarizing figure. Even though today he is beloved and romanticized in our historical memory, the fact is, he was probably among the most hated black people in America during the 1960s. He was not celebrated, he was vilified. And much of the reason for that was his anti-war stance, which was seen as un-American, unpatriotic, and dangerous. But also he was hated because of his relationship with Malcolm X, who was a minister in the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam was a religious sect made up of black people who had this unorthodox, shall we say, view of Islam. They did not practice traditional Islam. They believed that this man, Elijah Muhammad, was a prophet on earth. He was not a prophet. At any rate, Malcolm X was a minister of the Nation of Islam. And they rejected Christianity. They rejected racial integration. They rejected having anything to do with the United States government. Malcolm X taught his followers, you don't march, you don't sit in, you don't try to integrate with white people, you don't live in neighborhoods with white people, you don't vote, you don't participate in the American system. Because the American system rejects you as a black person. The American system has held you in bondage your whole life. These are the kinds of things that he would say in his sermon, okay? It spoke to young Cassius Clay. Muhammad Ali was born as Cassius Clay. He had eventually changed his name, embrace a Muslim name. So in writing this book, Randy Roberts and I, we wanted to explain, how did Cassius Clay become Muhammad Ali? How did he become this black symbol, this figure of black independence and black nationalism? How did that happen? Because he's really a crucial figure, not just in sports history, but in American history, where the wires cross between the sports world and the political world. And so that's what we set out to do, is to explain this relationship, how they came together, formed a bond as close as brothers, how it broke because of politics and all sorts of messiness in the Nation of Islam, and ultimately Malcolm X's assassination by members of the Nation of Islam in 1965. That story is told in this book, Blood Brothers, which became a Netflix documentary. So Randy and I, we worked with a production team called Lightbox. We sold the film rights from the book to them. And then we worked with them as consultants. I shared research materials, advised them on people they could interview, talked about ideas, gave them some source material that you'll see in the documentary, and then they interviewed me. They flew me to Los Angeles. It was really cool. It was really hit me that when I got there, I was in this old abandoned warehouse, and there were puddles of water on the cement. I don't know why. But there was lights everywhere, a whole crew of like 10 or 12 people, producers, director, other people there, and I thought to myself, they're all here because of the work that Randy and I did for this book that we wrote. This is pretty cool. So I did the interview. I talked for 3 hours nonstop, and I was like, I gotta catch a plane. I got nothing else for you. And then they put it out on Netflix, and you can watch it. I hope you do. Check it out. If you don't have time to read the book, I think maybe you'll enjoy the documentary. And so it was a proud moment for me as a writer, a great joy. And I would keep writing. So next slide. Randy and I wrote a series of other books together, baseball books. One is about Mickey Mantle, who's a great icon of the New York Yankees. This is about a season in 1956 where he really emerges as the face of baseball. Then we wrote a book called War Fever, which is a braided narrative about 3 figures connected to Boston during the First World War and the great influenza pandemic. One of those figures is a young Babe Ruth, who is a pitcher turned emerging slugger for the Boston Red Sox. So it's a book I enjoyed writing with him as well. Next slide. My most recent book is about my childhood hero, Michael Jordan. I wanted to write about this book to think about why he mattered so much to us, particularly to my generation, the Jordan generation, who wanted to be like Mike. What was that all about? Where did that come from? How did race, how did politics, how did celebrity culture shape the image of Michael Jordan, the hero that we all came to know? How was that image manufactured? How did we all become consumers of this culture of Air Jordan sneakers? Anyone in here wearing sneakers with a Jumpman on them? A handful of you. Okay. So you might be interested in that story. Okay. Next slide. All right. Get you some writing tips and then Q&A. A few tips for you. If you're interested in writing, anybody going to continue writing or enjoy writing? A few of you? Okay. All right. It's okay if not, but these are things I think matter. Good writers are good readers. You've got to read, and you've got to read books. Now, even if you're not going to become a writer, here's a piece of advice to you. How many of you plan to go to college? Okay, the majority of you. I need you to do some summer reading because I'm getting students at a school, Georgia Tech, which is very competitive, students who come with straight A's, but sometimes they struggle with reading longer pieces, with reading books. You've got to be able to do it. You got to be able to buckle down, concentrate, and focus. It's a skill. It's a test in some ways. Break it up for yourself. Start reading. Read about subjects that speak to you. Anything, nonfiction, novels, whatever. But read books, okay? Number 2, if you're going to write, you've got to write about subjects that matter to you. Don't focus so much on the readers and what readers think, and I've stopped worrying about reviewers because I'm not going to make all the reviewers happy. I've got to focus on what it is I have to say. And if I think about that kid that was here 25 years ago who wasn't so sure who he was, that's the thing about writing. It's giving me my voice, my identity, my purpose. Find that something. It doesn't have to be writing for you. But believe in yourself. Don't accept limitations. Don't let other people put limitations, right? And the fact is who you are today, you're not going to be that same person in 25 years. You're going to grow. You're going to change. You're going to evolve. You're going to have new relationships. You're going to see yourself in the world from a different perspective. Writing did that for me. History did that for me. Begin with the end in mind. Write with a goal. You've got to have an idea or you want to have a broader message that reaches people. And so from the very beginning, when I choose a project, it has to have a larger purpose beyond just that it's important to me. So I've got to kind of make that connection. Finally, I try to write in a way that engages the reader's mind, the intellect. Write something that's provocative, that gets them to want to keep reading, right? But I also try to appeal to the emotions, make readers feel something, experience history, not just read the words on the page, right? I want them to be able to see what happened in their mind's eye. Most of all, what I want them to do is to turn the page. I try to write in a way that makes them turn the page, right? That's what I want to try to do. So, do we have time for questions? 3 minutes? Okay, rapid fire. What do you got? In the back.
Do you have a singular favorite moment where sports meets like culture or politics?
Oh, yeah. Favorite? Gosh. I'm going to reframe it so let's say single most important. I think for me it's Jackie Robinson. You know, you could probably make the case that Robinson or Ali were the most important athletes of the 20th century. I'd probably give the nod to Robinson. And the reason is that I think that in the middle of the 20th century, when he breaks the color barrier in baseball, it was like the first domino in a row of dominoes tipping over. Suddenly, other sports executives and college coaches, they took the risk of bringing in black athletes on their teams. And it started the integration process. So I think in my mind, I would lean towards him. But you could also make the case that Ali is up there as well. And there are others. We could have this debate all day. That's a good question. What else do you got? Yeah, over there in the end.
How much did you sell Blood Brothers to Netflix for? Or can you not say?
I can answer it. here's the thing. In a documentary, you don't make a lot of money. We thought we were also going to, well, we did sell what's called the dramatic rights for a scripted series, which could be turned into like a drama, a television series with episodes, with actors and so on, or a motion picture. That's where you make the real money. We thought we had something with Showtime, but then Showtime went through a transition recently, and they're like, we're not going to move forward with it. So, but here's what I've tried to learn from that. Not to attach expectations to my books. They're not all going to be like Blood Brothers, and they're not, and they haven't been. Blood Brothers has done the best in terms of copies sold and whatever, but if that's it, then I had my moment in the sun. I'm not a rich man. That's not why I do it. I never thought I was going to make money doing this. Any other questions? How many of you can at least watch Blood Brothers documentary sometime? Watch it for me. Okay, if you watch it, send me an email. Tell me what you think, okay? All right, have a great weekend. Thanks for your time.